Obi-Wan loved Anakin and deeply, sincerely, and with the unwavering loyalty of a brother. But love isn't the same as understanding. Their relationship began in the ashes of tragedy, when Qui-Gon Jinn died on Naboo, and Obi-Wan inherited a responsibility he never prepared for. He didn't mentor Anakin because he chose to. He mentored him because fate cornered him into it. And that single moment formed the cracks that would widen over the years, shaping the emotional distance between them long before Mustafar split them apart physically. Obi-Wan approached Anakin like a student, but Anakin approached Obi-Wan like the closest thing he ever had to a father. That mismatch shaped their entire bond. Obi-Wan taught from structure, discipline, and the rigidity of the Jedi Code, the same structure that raised him peacefully since childhood. Anakin responded from fear, longing, and the desperation of someone who had already lost everything once and knew he could lose everything again at any moment. They weren't speaking the same emotional language, even when they thought they were. Anakin's childhood trauma made him fundamentally different from every Jedi in the Order, but Obi-Wan, shaped by temple life, never fully understood that. He never knew what it meant to wake up afraid. He never knew what it meant to live without safety. He never knew loss the way Anakin did. So when Anakin expressed fear, Obi-Wan saw instability. When Anakin questioned the code, Obi-Wan saw arrogance. When Anakin begged for control over his life, Obi-Wan saw impatience. He loved Anakin, yes, but he misinterpreted every signal because he didn't know how to read a heart raised in pain. Obi-Wan believed that discipline could fix Anakin, because discipline was what shaped him. But Anakin didn't need structure. He needed someone to acknowledge the magnitude of his trauma. The Jedi taught him to suppress attachments. Obi-Wan enforced that teaching. But to Anakin, attachment wasn't a problem. It was the only thing that ever kept him alive. His mother's love, Padmé's compassion, Obi-Wan's presence. These weren't weaknesses, they were lifelines. And every time Obi-Wan reminded him to let go, Anakin heard the same message. The things that matter to you are the things you must abandon. Obi-Wan misread Anakin's ambition too. What Obi-Wan saw as pride was really fear. Anakin didn't want recognition to feel superior. He wanted it to feel secure. He wanted someone to tell him he wasn't failing. He wanted reassurance, not authority. But Obi-Wan, constantly trying to shape him into an ideal Jedi Knight, gave him responsibility instead of comfort, challenges instead of affirmation, and lessons instead of understanding. This misunderstanding grew worse during the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan saw Anakin's battlefield brilliance as proof of growth. In reality, Anakin's heroism was a coping mechanism. Saving others helped him avoid facing his own unraveling emotions. Being a great hero of the Ayatollah Republic gave him a purpose he felt slipping everywhere else. Obi-Wan admired that side of him, but never looked deeply enough to see the cracks beneath the surface. Obi-Wan also never understood Anakin's relationship with Palpatine. He saw Palpatine as a manipulative politician, not the emotional anchor Anakin had been searching for his entire life. While Obi-Wan offered logic, Palpatine offered validation. While Obi-Wan offered Jedi dogma, Palpatine offered empathy, even if it was fake. The simple truth is this: Palpatine listened to Anakin more than Obi-Wan ever did, and Anakin naturally gravitated toward the person who made him feel seen. The deeper tragedy is that Obi-Wan thought he was doing everything right. He believed that following the Jedi way was the best thing for Anakin, even when the Jedi way was suffocating him. He believed emotional distance would strengthen Anakin's discipline, even though it only deepened his loneliness. He believed warnings and lessons would guide Anakin, even though they only made him feel judged. Obi-Wan wasn't neglectful. He was simply the wrong mentor for a boy who needed emotional guidance, not philosophical correction. By the time they reached Mustafar, years of miscommunication had transformed into heartbreak. Obi-Wan saw a friend who betrayed everything he stood for. Anakin saw a mentor who never understood who he really was. When Obi-Wan shouted, "You are the chosen one," he was grieving the ideal student he tried to mold. When Anakin screamed back in hatred, he was grieving the father figure he wanted, but never fully received. Their final moment: "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." It wasn't just a tragic goodbye, it was a confession Obi-Wan never said when it mattered. Anakin died thinking love had to be earned. Obi-Wan realized too late that love needed to be expressed, not implied. Their bond had always been strong, but never aligned. They loved each other fiercely, but never understood each other clearly. And that is the tragedy. Obi-Wan didn't fail Anakin on Mustafar. He failed him in the years when he believed structure could replace empathy, when love stayed silent, and when understanding came too late. Obi-Wan Kenobi never realized that his greatest failure wasn't losing Anakin to the dark side. It was misunderstanding him every step of the way. Their conflict didn't begin on Mustafar. It began in the temple, in every conversation where Obi-Wan thought he was offering guidance, while Anakin heard only judgment. This wasn't a relationship broken in one moment. It was a slow erosion spread across years of miscommunication, mismatched emotional needs, and two men trying desperately to love each other in ways that neither could fully grasp. Obi-Wan believed that shaping Anakin into a model Jedi was the highest form of care he could offer. He believed rules were support. He believed boundaries were love. He believed structure would keep Anakin safe. But Anakin didn't understand love in terms of discipline. He understood it through attachment, closeness, and vulnerability. Obi-Wan's attempts to help him always felt like pressure, because Anakin needed warmth, not walls. What Obi-Wan saw as mentorship, Anakin experienced as emotional distance, and that distance accumulated like dust, slowly, quietly, invisibly, until it became suffocating. Anakin needed reassurance. Obi-Wan offered stoicism. Anakin needed emotional honesty. Obi-Wan offered Jedi doctrine. Anakin needed to talk about fear. Obi-Wan taught him to fear fear. Anakin needed someone who acknowledged his trauma. Obi-Wan taught him to ignore it. This mismatch didn't make Obi-Wan a bad teacher or Anakin a bad student. It made them incompatible. Obi-Wan was trained to be serene, calm, self-contained. Anakin was raised inside chaos, torn from his mother, shaped by loss and danger. They were never speaking the same emotional language, even when they believed they were communicating perfectly. Obi-Wan truly thought he could guide Anakin through discipline, because discipline had always saved him. But Obi-Wan didn't understand trauma. He didn't understand the wounds Anakin brought with him. Wounds the Jedi dismissed as attachments instead of the scars of slavery and abandonment. Obi-Wan didn't know how to talk about pain because he'd been taught his entire life to bury it, and so he taught Anakin to bury it too, not realizing that buried pain grows teeth. The tragedy is that Obi-Wan was always trying. He tried harder than anyone in the Order. He loved Anakin fiercely, faithfully, and selflessly. But love without understanding becomes pressure. Love without emotional literacy becomes silence. Love without the ability to meet someone where they are becomes distance disguised as guidance. Obi-Wan never yelled, never abused, never hated. Yet Anakin still felt unseen, because the kind of support Obi-Wan offered was the kind Anakin could never properly receive. And throughout their lives, another presence filled the emotional vacuum between them. Palpatine understood Anakin in all the ways Obi-Wan couldn't. He validated the emotions the Jedi rejected. He comforted the fears the Jedi dismissed. He encouraged the attachments the Jedi condemned. He rewarded vulnerability instead of punishing it. Palpatine didn't win because Obi-Wan didn't care. He won because he spoke to the parts of Anakin Obi-Wan didn't know existed. By the time Revenge of the Sith arrived, Anakin wasn't choosing Palpatine over the Jedi. He was choosing emotional survival over emotional starvation. He wasn't picking the dark side over the light. He was picking the first person who made him feel understood. And still, Obi-Wan never saw this wound clearly. Even on Mustafar, he believed Anakin fell because of greed, pride, ambition. He didn't understand that Anakin fell because he was terrified. Terrified of losing Padme, terrified of failing again, terrified of disappointing the universe that expected greatness from him before he even knew who he was. Obi-Wan interpreted Anakin's fear as rage. He interpreted panic as betrayal. He interpreted desperation as madness. And Anakin, devastated by the belief that Obi-Wan came to kill him instead of save him, interpreted that misunderstanding as confirmation of his worst fear, that he had never been loved for who he was, only for who the Jedi hoped he would become. Years later in Kenobi, that misunderstanding continues to define them. Obi-Wan sees Vader as a monster, never realizing that the monster is just the logical endpoint of the emotional isolation that shaped Anakin's entire life. Vader's fury isn't hatred, it's grief weaponized. Every blow he strikes isn't vengeance. It's the scream of a man begging the universe to justify the pain he never learned to process. Obi-Wan keeps looking at Vader as a symbol of darkness instead of a portrait of the hurt he never helped heal. Their final confrontation breaks both illusions. When Obi-Wan apologizes, it is the first time he speaks to Anakin's heart instead of his behavior. He finally acknowledges the emotional truth he avoided for decades, that he failed to understand Anakin when it mattered most. And Anakin's response, through cracked armor and a trembling voice, reveals a truth Obi-Wan had never considered. I am not your failure. This isn't absolution. It's confession. It's Anakin admitting that his fall wasn't caused by one man's mistake. It wasn't Obi-Wan's fault, but it was shaped by the emotional void he never knew how to fill. For the first time, they understand each other. For the first time, the pain between them becomes visible instead of unspoken. For the first time, Obi-Wan sees that Vader wasn't born in fire, he was born in silence. Their tragedy isn't rooted in hatred, it's rooted in misalignment. It's rooted in love, expressed in incompatible ways. It's rooted in a relationship that was doomed not because either of them was wrong, but because they were never able to say the things they needed to say when it still mattered. Obi-Wan's healing comes from finally recognizing that Anakin didn't fall because he was weak, or selfish, or evil. He fell because he was isolated, pressured, and emotionally misunderstood by every system and every person who claimed to guide him. Obi-Wan's journey in Kenobi is not about forgiving Anakin. It's about forgiving himself for loving Anakin imperfectly. And Anakin's tragedy is that by the time he finally says the words Obi-Wan needed to hear, it's through a broken mask and an artificial voice. Their understanding comes a lifetime too late. That's why their story hurts. Not because Anakin fell, not because Obi-Wan failed, but because they loved each other with everything they had. And it still wasn't enough to save either of them.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.